Welcome to In Session with Ashley B. This is a space for real, thoughtful conversations about being human, especially around trauma, healing, faith, and the nervous system. This podcast is for education and reflection, not therapy. Take what's helpful, leave what's not, and listen in a way that feels supportive for you. Welcome back, everyone. I'm your host, Ashley B. I am so excited you are here. This podcast used to be formerly known as Sunflower Movement, and I have since transitioned it to being In Session with Ashley B. Why the name change? Partly because I was hoping that this space could be an opportunity for my listeners and my followers on social media to get to know me better and how I work not only as a therapist, but as a human being. Unfortunately, is impossible to convey all the nuance on social media and talk about all the things that I want to talk about. And I have realized that I already have this incredible podcast in this space to talk with you all more in depth. Now, this doesn't mean I'm not going to have guests. I'm unsure exactly what this podcast will look like in terms of guests that come on, but I do know for a fact that this podcast is going to be driven by you all. I already have 10 submissions prepped and ready to dive into today. This is going to be a time for you to tell me anything, talk about anything, a space for me to share my thoughts both as a professional, also from a personal level, also my insights and experience in working with so many clients, and also just my expertise on the nervous system. And I really look forward to bringing your experiences to the forefront. And honestly, when I think about whether I wanted to bring the podcast back or not, it was all of you that inspired me. I had someone reach out to tell me they had been listening to my podcast, Meeting Sunflower Movement, the former podcast, and I was a bit taken back because I hadn't dropped an episode since April of 2025, and this was just a few months ago. And it honestly really inspired me to think about this platform and how to reach more of you, how to have more dialogue. So then I decided to post it on my social media, and here we are. You all were really interested in chatting and having these conversations, and I'm excited to dive in. So, that's a little bit about the move to In Session with Ashley B. Again, I am hoping that this is completely led by my listeners, meaning what you guys want to talk about, I'm going to talk about on here. And there's nothing off limits. If you want to talk about stuff with religion and faith, obviously, please bring that up. I have a lot of diverse questions today. I do have some faith stuff, but I do have things about sexuality and mental health and relationships and work and all the things. So I really want to make this a very eclectic podcast where we talk about everything that you want to talk about. I think sometimes there's not always a space where we get to feel seen, heard, and believed. And this is really pulling from Sunflower Movement. And my original inspiration for the podcast is to foster that space for people. And I think sometimes it's really scary to share certain things. And I thought, what a better way to do it than offer an anonymous submission for all of you. So, again, everything will be anonymous. This will live on my platform, my social media platform, Ashley B underscore therapy, as well as the platform for this podcast, In Session with Ashley B. I will also include the link for submissions in the show notes so you can write in there. Okay, I think I've covered all of that, hopefully. If there's lingering questions, let me know. Before we jump in, I wanted to give a little update, I guess, maybe on myself. I feel that there has been a lot of growth in me personally since I finished season 1 last April. I know I shared a lot of personal things about myself on the podcast last year. So if you want to learn more about maybe some of the things I'm about to talk about, go back and listen to Sunflower Movement, which is also will be located in the same podcast. All of the previous episodes for Sunflower Movement are under the new name, In Session with Ashley B. I just figured to make the transition really seamless and also allow you to access my previous body of work. I wanted them to live within the same podcast space. So, a little life update. I think the biggest thing that I wanted to share, which I think is really important to myself, but also the work that I do on myself and my own therapy and just the power of brain spotting. And if you don't know what brain spotting is, I have several episodes that you need to go back and listen to learn more about brain spotting because I'm not going to dive into that right now. It's too long of a conversation, but brain spotting is a form of therapy that works with the nervous system. I'm a certified brain spotting practitioner. I also do sessions with my own therapist every 2 weeks. So all of that being said, I think one of the things I talked about last season quite a bit was my own personal family difficulties. And in November, I talked about being estranged from my dad, actually. And then I think in January, I talked about reaching out to him and starting a conversation. And I actually wanted to share that a year later, it didn't take a year. My dad and I really kind of mended fences, I would say, throughout the spring of last year, but we are actually in a really solid place in the sense that we are no longer estranged. We're talking regularly. And I feel nothing but love for my dad. And that isn't because he's changed and he's apologized and like made all these amends. I think I just got to a place in my own journey where I was able to understand and see my dad for the person that he is and his own trauma and distress. And not that that was an excuse for his behavior, but it wasn't my burden to carry, not my responsibility to hold on to. And I think just loving him for him and the way he is right now has allowed me to have a relationship with him that feels very safe and supportive. And I don't know what the future will look like, but I can tell you that I have a significant reduction in activation in my relationship with him, and that's been really powerful. I will also say that I know this has come extensively from brain spotting and doing my own brain spotting sessions. I had a huge session back in September while I was at a training, and I was really able to move through some of the generational trauma that lives in my nervous system that my dad endured as a child. And honestly, for both of my parents, I've been able to just see them from a place of love and understand why they parented me the way they did. And not because, again, it doesn't justify what happened, but it's it's not something I need to take responsibility for, and just has allowed me to love them. And I know that sounds really simple, but it was actually much more complex, and it was a long, long journey. And I wanted to share that on here because I talked a lot about it last season, and if you want to kind of go back, you can go back and look through my episodes. I know I have an episode talking about just like my family trauma and distress that happened for almost 5 years ago, and then I talked a little bit about where I was at in the new year last year, and so it feels kind of divine that now a year later and I'm starting the podcast again, and we're just talking about all the things that I have this really big life update that if I'll be really straight up with you. If you would have asked me even like a year and a half ago, I would have said, no shot, no shot. I'm going to have a relationship with my dad. He's never going to change. He's never going to be different. And I think so many of us get like that and get in that headspace. And I just want to say that it's possible to have a relationship with your parents, even if they don't change, even if they don't show up different. And I think me having grace and compassion for my dad, also having grace and compassion for myself, is allowing me to have a good relationship with him in a way that feels in alignment with me, that obviously has boundaries, but also just a place of mutual respect, which I've always wanted in my relationship with my parents. And I think one of the things I've realized is my role in that mutual respect. And yeah, anyhow, long, long journey to get here. It's obviously much more complex than even the depth that I'm going into, but it felt important to want to share. I think that's my biggest life update. Other than that, things are just still chugging along. The social media has been a journey. Obviously, if you're listening to this podcast, you are familiar with my social media platform, AshleyB_therapy. I often talk about how I didn't choose to become a content creator. And I've been thinking a lot about how that just sort of happened and I slid into that. And so I don't think I've always been super intentional about my decision making around it. And so it has been a bumpy, messy journey, but something that has also brought me incredible connections and relationships, and also allowed me to tap into a creative side I didn't know necessarily existed. So while there's been a lot of hard things that have come with a growing social media platform, I think it's also really allowed me to evolve as a human being in so many ways and just help reach other people who feel alone on their journey, especially in regards to leaving Mormonism and not really having someone that sees them and believes them. And that's always my hope of my platform. So yeah, I still see clients every week. I'm trying to think if there's anything else exciting to update. Oh, I think the one thing I didn't bring up about this podcast specifically, because part of the reason why I ended season 1 and kind of took a break from the podcast was a little bit of burnout. I was burnt out from just doing too much, trying to do it all. I think that's my trauma response in a lot of ways. So I was really intentional about thinking about what would make this podcast manageable, doable. How could I show up consistently for my audience? So it's kind of fun. I'm obviously doing these submissions based podcasts where we chat every month about things you want to chat about. And I'm going to drop them as a little nod to the Mormon church on the first Sunday of every month. So you can expect a new episode from me on the first Sunday of every month, and it'll be like our own little version of testimony meeting. So, with that being said, I think it's probably time to jump into the submissions and just like get chatting for today. I'm going to get through as many of these submissions as I can before, the time is up. And if I don't get to your submission, know that it will be saved and hopefully talked about in the next episode. So keep writing in, keep asking your questions, keep telling your stories, whatever you need. I am so here for it. All right. First submission. I never experienced female rage until I realized that things that were always mine, my body, my intuition, my sexuality, were taken from me, and I was taught that I had to be worthy of it. My body was a gift from God, and I had to follow strict rules to not defile it and show God that I loved him. No free choice in what I wear or what I consume into my body. I didn't even know what my intuition was. It was the whispering of the spirit, which I had to be pure and worthy to even hear that voice, or it was Satan, the ultimate trickster. And my sexuality, so much shame about me as a sexual being and the ability to experience pleasure. My body was for my spouse and his pleasure, not for me and my curiosity. I was never truly safe in my own body. My body felt foreign to me. My thoughts were spiraling with, where is this thought coming from, by God or Satan? When I finally sat with this terrible sadness that had been lingering and realized that was shame about my body, I cried and was so incredibly angry. You know, the scenes in the movies where the main character screams because they are so overcome with anger? I never knew I could experience that emotion at that depth, but I did in that moment. It breaks my heart a million times for my younger self and those women still in the church that I know many, if not all, carry the same shame, even if they don't realize it. I never realized I carried it while I was in the church. I thought this submission was so beautiful and important, which is why I wanted to read it, because I think, especially as a woman growing up in Mormonism, anger is a very difficult emotion to allow yourself to feel and to go all the way into. And as I was reading, of course, you're angry. I think so many of us are angry. There was a big part of us that was taken from us because of those early messages around purity and sexuality. And I think in a lot of ways, it strips you from having this type of relationship with your body. And it makes sense to me that you're angry. It would be really weird, honestly, if you weren't angry, right? Anger gets such a bad rap. It's like this idea that we shouldn't be angry, and especially when you grow up in religion, like anger is of the devil. And if I've learned anything in my years as a therapist and working with the nervous system, anger is an essential emotion, and allowing ourselves to hold space for that anger and allow it and go all the way into it can be really powerful in our healing journey. Because, yes, this scene from a movie you're talking about, we can all kind of imagine it, but the freedom that can come from letting that rage out in a way that feels in a way, in my opinion, that is safe and healthy. I think that's why these rage rooms, these rooms where you go in and beat the shit out of things are really popular right now because of what they allow you to get out and work through in a way that is productive and a release for your nervous system, right? We're not meant to carry all of that, but we do. We shove it all down, which this person talked about. And so then to let it come up and out, I think can be really freeing. I'm also with you in that I think part of the way many people survive high control religion is to not see it when they're a part of it, because if they don't see it, then they don't have to actually reconcile what it all means. Could you imagine being an active, true believing member of the church to then have this insight and awareness about everything it's done to your body? It would be really hard to coexist in that space. And so it might not feel safe to even kind of tap into some of these things until you've stepped away or done a bit of deconstruction. And as someone who I would say I've been on a huge journey for my own sexuality and done a lot of work in my own pleasure, I want to just talk about how incredibly possible healing is and how to get into this place where your body, where you're allowed to be a sexual being and feel pleasure and ask for pleasure is real. And it also takes a lot of work and intention and curiosity. I also think allowing all types of emotions, which I thought this was so beautiful that you shared and you let us hear you and see you. So thank you. Thank you for writing in and sharing your anger with us. I have no doubt it will resonate with someone who needs to hear it. Moving on. Number 2, how do I navigate my mixed faith marriage? We haven't been active in about 3 years, but in the past year, I've had a faith crisis and have been deconstructing. We can't seem to talk about anything regarding the church without it turning into an argument. I try my best to stay grounded and de escalate, but my husband hears any criticism of the church as a criticism of him. I do my best to not bring up anything with him, but I'm a naturally open person, so I've been having a hard time holding my tongue. We have a 1-year-old, and I don't want to raise her in the church. I'm strongly against indoctrination from birth, and so far it's been okay. But I know as she gets older, we're going to have a tough conversation about the way we want to raise her. How do I go about this? We can't afford couples therapy at the moment, but I'm worried about the way things are headed. How could I facilitate church discussions that feel necessary without hurting my husband? By the way, I love your work and content. It's helped me immensely on my deconstruction journey. Thank you so much for that very kind compliment and for honestly being part of the community. It's questions like this why I even exist and am able to do what I do. I also just I think I've made this pretty clear on my social media, but also probably in previous episodes that I am not a couples therapist. I work with individuals and I specialize in trauma. Although I'm a marriage and family therapist, I just never went into couples work. I don't do a lot of mixed faith marriage stuff, again, because I'm not a couples therapist, but I do have some insights here that I think might be helpful because I think a lot of people run into this in their marriages, especially when it's mixed faith, where they become almost I'm not saying that you're fixated on your partner, but it's like obviously part of your struggle is that you guys can't have these conversations. And it sounds like he's very much a true believing member. And I think what's really important is to come back to like having mutual respect for each other's beliefs, even though it might be really difficult to respect his belief because you have seen the harm and distress it's caused. I think that having respect for it can actually create more openness in the relationship. And I think the best thing that you can do is work with your own activation around the things that you're navigating. Meaning, like it sounds like you do have a lot of things that you want to explore and talk about related to religion and the church and your own deconstruction. And it sounds like to me your partner is actually probably not the best person to have those conversations with because it is incredibly activating to him because he's still very much a part of the church. And unfortunately, I think what's very characteristic of a lot of high control religion is it becomes difficult to separate your identity from it. Because if you're talking negatively about the church, he's taking it personal because that's his belief system, which that's not your responsibility. That's for him to figure out. And I'm not saying you can never have conversations about the church, but I think to expect him to show up differently is going to be really hard right now because he's clearly activated. And I think if you can kind of work through some of your own faith deconstruction in your own time and in your own space, and maybe with some safe people or friendships that are not your relationship and you allow yourself to feel more secure in your decisions, then he will maybe feel it's less of an attack on him because you're not constantly bringing it up with him. And it doesn't sound like you're constantly bringing it up with him, but just in general, he's telling me what I'm hearing is he doesn't have the capacity to have these conversations. And I think when we keep returning to that same dialogue and expecting a different outcome, it's not going to happen. And so my recommendation would for you to go inward and spend some time curiously being with your own stuff. I know several people who are in mixed faith dynamics, and it's fascinating. I have one friend that I chat with a lot, and she has left the church and her husband hasn't. And she says that actually recently, as of recently, he's been able to share some concerns with her about the church. And she talks a lot about how she's like, I just never really pushed my beliefs on him. I never asked him to question. I never asked him to think differently. I just showed up, and respected where he was at. And I think that communicates a level of safety. She was saying, I'm leaving the church and I'm okay. And I'm okay with my decision. I'm comfortable with my decision and I don't need to push my decision on you. And I'm going to let you figure it out in your own time. And I am a firm believer that how we show up in the world impacts our partner. Your partner gets to receive your healing based on how you feel in your relationship with yourself, in your own choices and your own decisions. And now obviously I think there's boundaries here, and I think if your husband is not giving you that same mutual respect, or if he's pushing the church on you, right? You do need to have some lines in the sand. I'm not hearing that in this submission. I'm hearing that you guys have a 1-year-old and you're pretty firm in not wanting your 1-year-old to be indoctrinated, and then you said it's not an issue. It's not been an issue so far. And I really want you to hold on to that. I want you to stay present right now in the here and now. Because yes, I think eventually you guys are going to have some conversations, especially if your husband continues to be a member, about the future in terms of baptism, but you're not there yet and it's farther off. So I think the best thing you can do is be right here in the moment and kind of ground yourself and trust yourself to have the foundation to have some of these more intense conversations as they come. Because you can spend like 4 years worrying about it before she goes to primary. And then you've spent 4 years worrying. And then maybe you sit down to have the primary conversation. Your husband's like, okay, yeah, she doesn't have to go. Like maybe you guys have a mutual decision there, right? And you've just spent 4 years worrying about it. Or you can just say, like, I'm going to work on myself. I'm going to work on understanding what my boundaries are, what my limitations are. How can I respect my husband's religion while also still respecting myself? And be really clear on that so that you feel really competent to have these conversations with him later on. I think it's so easy to worry about the future, but that is very distressing. Can we come back to the here and now? Can we ground in the here and now? And I just really want to revisit this last sentence: is how can I facilitate church discussions that feel necessary without hurting my husband? What are the church discussions? I think obviously any discussion you guys have about parenting your child is a discussion, and you have to be able to set your personal feelings aside. I think as a parent, you are allowed to not want your daughter to go to primary, right? Or not be indoctrinated, or whatever those boundaries are. And can you guys find a mutually beneficial decision around that? And I think, really importantly, making it about the problem, not the person, and focus on that together. I also think really deciding what church discussions are necessary outside of parenting your daughter. I don't know if other church discussions are necessary unless they're impacting your relationship, again, unless your husband's pushing the beliefs on you. So I think it's important to be really mindful that you're not pushing those things on him too. And I know that maybe is hard to hear because you want him to get to the place that you are. And I am the first to acknowledge that I know Mormonism causes harm, and I know it impacts mental health, right? And I also know that people cannot see that until they're ready to see it. And if we really push them to see that, their walls get bigger and stronger because they're trying to protect themselves. It is a trauma response. So I think the best thing we can do is just be really respectful of their beliefs and be curious and open. Like I would maybe say to him, hey, I really want to talk about primary, and I'm noticing you're upset. Can you tell me more about what's making you upset? And I think curiosity goes a long, long way. So anyways, I hope that was helpful. Kind of long-winded. I'm sometimes way too long-winded, which is why I prefer to do Ask Me Anythings on a podcast than on my stories. Okay, we're going to move on because I'm only to submission number 3. I don't know if I'm going to make it through all of them today, but again, like I said, I'll save everything. Okay, number 3, realizing that Mormonism taught me that obedience equals love, and how to learn that belief that my parents needs to approve of everything I do. This is really short submission, and also there's so much there to unpack and dive into. I think that this is incredibly real and something I talk about frequently with my clients too, because this idea of being an obedient daughter, right? It's not even an obedient daughter to your parents, it's an obedient daughter or son to God, right? And I think that really lingers in our system a even after we leave the religion. I also think there's a generational component here too. A huge part of Mormonism is that you honor your posterity. There's a ton of discussion about how, like all the things the early saints did to come here to settle, we need to really honor them. And it's all about listening to your mother and father, and you can't disappoint people. And unfortunately, The reality is we're now living for people who we're going to outlive. And I have this conversation a lot that and it's going to sound a little bit morbid. It's going to sound a little bit morbid, not Mormon. Whoopsie. It's going to sound a little bit morbid, but I think that you're hopefully you outlive your parents, right? And the life you should be cultivating should be for you and your current family, if you have one, or your future family unit, and not for them. Because if I'm living my life to not disappoint my parents, who am I disappointing? I'm disappointing myself, and I'm also disappointing my children if I have them or if you have them. And I think really thinking about, what do you want to cultivate in your life? What patterns do you want to carry on, and what patterns do you want to change? And I think this is going to feel a bit uncomfortable because maybe you're going to make a choice and decision, and you normally have your mom or dad to validate that choice and decision. And you just have to kind of start making choices and decisions on your own. And that might feel really uncomfortable, but can you just practice being in the discomfort of that? It might look like having different boundaries with your parents, and not because you're going to be explicitly telling them these boundaries, but maybe talking to them less about certain things and not just offering information. And I think also too, really important that you separate their feelings from yours. So if your parents are upset about a choice or decision they made, that's their responsibility to navigate. That's not yours. And that can be a huge like line to say when they're upset. Like, I get that you're upset. I can't change that for you. That's something you need to go figure out. I'm choosing to live my life in a way that feels in alignment with me. And I think that is going to be hard and uncomfortable, but the more you practice it, the more you work on it, the better and easier it can get. You think about it in the terms of like working out or building a muscle. It's building that muscle in a way. And so repetition, it can be really helpful. But I think that kind of also reparenting yourself. And I would invite you to think about the things you needed as a child and what would have helped you maybe not feel like you have to be obedient. And I would also practice giving that to yourself as well. So not only are maybe you showing up in your relationships differently, but you're also treating yourself differently. To unlearn something is going to take time. It's going to be messy. You're not going to do it perfectly, and that's okay. Can you kind of offer some grace to yourself and reparent yourself differently? Great submissions, you guys. Loving these. All right, next one. I feel like God wants us all to be together forever, regardless, but my husband thinks we can only do that through the temple. What's your opinion of this? I'm the one in the relationship that is done with the LDS church, but he's not. There were lots of mixed faith marriage questions on here, and I see you guys so completely. I think this is incredibly difficult. I honestly can only imagine how hard it would be to be in a relationship with your partner who has a completely different belief system. And similar to like the first submission that I read about mixed faith marriages, I really think you having mutual respect for each other's beliefs and not pushing beliefs on each other. And again, this goes for your husband and as well as for you. I think that's a really important kind of boundary to set. And then you focusing on kind of your own inner work and feeling really grounded and confident in who you are can be especially helpful. It doesn't mean that your partner is going to change, but I think it also will give you clarity in the direction you want your relationship to go. So that wasn't really your question here, but I just really wanted to validate that. I don't think that the temple is the only way we can all be together forever. I don't personally know that I believe in an afterlife. I think it's really hard for me to wrap my head around something that no one's ever really seen or experienced, right? It's just like these ideas about what an afterlife is like based on religion. And I will say that I do believe in something bigger than myself. I believe in a higher power, in that I believe that we're all interconnected in some way that's not always describable. I see that in my work as a therapist. I can't tell you the amount of times people come to my office with in the same week, and they all have the same theme of things they're navigating, and they're all completely different people in different walks of life. So I believe in something bigger than myself, but I think this idea that we need to do certain things in the here and now in order to be all together, and the afterlife really takes you out of the here and now because you're so fixated and worried about what's happening after you die that you're missing out right here. And I would imagine, if your husband's a member of the church, he has been told that this is the only way that you guys are going to be together for forever, and that's really hard to unpack, and it can be really distressing to think that maybe if you make certain choices you aren't going to be together forever. In my opinion, the eternal families doctrine offers the illusion of certainty, and that can be really enticing, but I am of the opinion that nothing is certain in this life, and we don't know what happens after we die. We can speculate, but I think making the most of the here and now and really grounding in that and choosing to believe in whatever God you want to believe in. If you believe in a God that is going to keep you all together after you die, I celebrate that. I'm with you in that. I just can't imagine the God in religion that they talk about is going to separate people if he's an all-loving, all-knowing being. I just don't imagine that would be a loving thing to do, right? And so I think mostly I would invite you to really invest in what you believe in. And can it be different than your husband? And if it can't be different, I would invite you to be curious about that. Why do you guys have to be on the same page? And I think sometimes it's because of our own activation, because this is scary stuff. It's really scary to deconstruct. It's really scary to be like, okay, the temple isn't the only way to the afterlife. And we will still cling to that even after you leave. That's your nervous system's like, but that's what we were always taught. So I think part of this is some of your own activation around that. And I would just invite you to really dive into it and be curious about where it's coming from. Okay, moving on, guys. How's everyone doing? How to learn self-differentiation. I've had a hard time figuring out my own inner voice when I've been taught to think and behave a certain way from family and the church. Thinking differently from my parents and church causes me so much anxiety. I think this is really kind of connected to what I was saying earlier too about not disappointing our parents, but also even that previous submission of how we will still gravitate to the things that we know out of as a trauma response, right? So the church unfortunately is masterful at not only creating the distress but the solution for the distress, right? It's really distressing to have all of these rules that you need to follow, but if you follow them, then you're going to be less distressed. And I think it keeps people locked in this loop. So then when you step away or you're believing differently, you're kind of uncertain about how to navigate it. Like, well, I don't know what my own instincts are. I don't know what I believe. I don't know what I think. I've been told what to think my whole entire life. And so I think this is going to take time to rebuild. It's like you're learning to use a part of yourself that, in my opinion, has always been there. This part that wants to be able to trust yourself does live within you. It's just been stifled because of the religion you grew up in as well as with your parents. So I would one just kind of notice that it gives you an anxiety and also just honor that that makes sense. It makes sense that it's anxiety provoking for you to listen to your own inner voice because you've never done it. So I think a lot of times when we have those things come up, our immediate response is to be reactive and mad or upset at the anxiety instead of just being open and curious that it's there. It's just information. It's just telling you, oh, like you haven't used this before. So we don't know how. And it's a little bit scary. That's so valid. And I think if that's your first step, that's a great first step, is being able to acknowledge why you're anxious. And I think also part of this is going really slow and starting to develop a relationship with yourself and getting to know your own self and what you like and what you enjoy. And maybe that sounds like superficial and cheesy, but I think we don't give enough credit to like getting to know ourselves because we've always been taught one, not to, that we're selfish and we don't have our own desires. But I think you can start really simple. I oftentimes will have my clients map out like different pillars of health. So how they take care of themselves physically, mentally, emotionally, how they take care of themselves in social situations, how they take care of themselves spiritually, and really start to think about what you do every day. I think physical health is pretty easy in the sense of like you have to eat and you have to drink water, but like really starting to notice like how do you show up for yourself? When are the times where you do listen to yourself? I hope you listen to yourself when you're hungry, right? Or when you're thirsty. And so sometimes making it that simple allows you to see the times when you do use your inner voice. I think a huge part of this is self-compassion and kind of talking to yourself in a way that you would talk to a friend. And so, how would you help your friend be curious about getting to know her inner voice? And if if she said to you, "Oh, like I just feel so anxious," what would you say? Right? And so I think it's about kind of shifting maybe a friendlier language to yourself as well to start to navigate this and start to see yourself as separate. It's a huge part of development where we start to separate from our parents. And unfortunately, I do think it's stifled when you grow up in high control religion. And obviously, if you grow up in an enmeshed household where there's blurred lines and boundaries, I grew up in that type of household and it was very, very difficult to step away, differentiate from my family. And I would say my family is not super strong, like in the church. But I think the more I did it, the more I started to make choices and decisions and not need my parents' approval, the better I got at it and the more confident I got. So I think right now I'm hearing you're anxious and it sounds like your anxiety is stopping you from differentiating. And so I think let's work with that anxiety, start to regulate the anxiety, and then step out and do it. And you might have a little bit of anxiety with you. But again, that makes sense because you're doing something you've never done. Okay, last one. We're only going to make it to about 6 today, but I'm going to save the rest. I feel disconnected from my sensual, sexy side because it's been suppressed for most of my life. I want to understand how to gently explore and reconnect with that part of myself. I am such like a sensual, sexy girly. I think it's been a part of my own work that I've, like, explored and broken down and unpacked in therapy and also just in my relationship with my partner. I would say that has been the foundational piece is having a safe partner to explore some of this with. So I think one, if you're in a relationship, being really mindful of that I think part of starting to reconnect to that sensual, sexy side is a partner who is secure in their own sexuality. And I think it can be difficult to fully embrace that if you are in a relationship and that partner is not in a place or a space where they can kind of honor that part of you. I would say that's super important. I think you can also start to do some of this stuff just on your own. And I think it's about kind of tapping into what maybe does turn you on. What do you find sexual? And this isn't even just like in the sense that you want to have sex, but what allows you to feel sexy? Are there certain clothes, scenes, movies, books? I'm obviously a big advocate of sexy books, and not because you're necessarily going to enact the things you read in the books, but I think it can give you a whole plethora of different ways of being sexy or sexual encounters that maybe you haven't heard or seen. I think it's also done in a way that just is more descriptive and you can kind of come up with your own pictures and images in your head versus having it to need to look a certain way. So I wouldn't invite you to kind of like explore in that way. I also think just getting to know our own body and touching our own body. And I'm not even saying like masturbation, while I think you certainly can go down that route, but just like, like what does your skin feel like? What is it like when you take a shower and the water is like running down you? I think, just creating a lot of sensual experiences for yourself and your body, when you rub lotion on your hands. I mean, I'm just kind of like pulling things like all different ways. But for example, I love to get pedicures, and I will intentionally like put my phone away when I'm getting a massage on my legs and just really focus on what that feels like. And I think that really helps me to tap into my body. And I'm not saying that necessarily makes me feel sexy, but there is this like sensuality of it, right? Where I'm like feeling that's what being sensual is to be able to be in our body and feel sensations. So I would even start with the things that aren't sexy, right? Like taking a shower, drinking water, like touching your skin, those types of things and building that and notice how it feels to live in your body in that way and kind of go from there. And then I think I do think that there is a time and place for sexual exploration of your own body and maybe exploring getting a vibrator and just, kind of really tapping into that. There's also an app that I have on my phone. It's called Dipsy, and it tells you sexy stories, but it has a bunch of categories and you can kind of pick from any category you might want to dive into. I think part of exploring our sexy sensual side is being curious about sexuality. I kind of view sexuality on this spectrum, and you might find that you really enjoy like two girls together or two guys together or a girl and a guy or two girls and a guy. And I'm not saying that that has to be like that's going to be taboo obviously for people to listen to, but I think that just being open and curious, and just because you like two girls does not necessarily mean you're a lesbian. It certainly can mean you're that, right? But just being really open to allowing all things to be out there and to allow things to be sexy and not sexy, like, oh no, I don't like that. I think that's part of how we figure out what we do and we don't like is by being open and curious to all different aspects of, sex, sensuality, sexuality. And I think going super, super slow. And that's why, again, I recommended like just starting with things and touch that feels good. That's not necessarily sexual is a great, great place to go. So hopefully that was helpful. All right, guys, I just talked for almost 45 minutes and I haven't done this in a long time. It feels a little bit vulnerable if I'm being perfectly honest. I feel a little bit vulnerable and just sharing everything and putting myself out there, but I'm excited. I'm excited to see where this goes and what we chat about. Again, I'll be dropping episodes the first Sunday of every month. It'll be like testimony meeting, but from a much different place. And there's nothing rehearsed. There will be no rehearsed testimonies being shared on here. So I think that's great. I just really appreciate you being here. I really appreciate your submissions. Again, you all are the driving force behind this podcast. You're the reason why I brought it back in the first place. And I'm really excited to continue going with it, to dive in and see where it takes us. So please, send me any feedback, thoughts. And your submissions don't just have to be questions. They can honestly just be like that very first share where she was talking about her rage, right? I mean, I love reading this kind of stuff. Obviously, had so many more submissions planned to get to today, so I will just move them to next month. And I think we're going to have no shortage of things to discuss. So thank you so much for spending time with me. Take care of yourself and you have a great day. We'll talk soon.